Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's really to dig into the blueprints used by some of the world's most successful, let's call them wealth architects.
Yeah, architects is a good word for it.
We're kind of tearing down the walls between, the 19th century industrialists and today's tech CEOs, the financial disruptors. We're looking for those common threads: ambition, innovation, and maybe that ethical gray area.
That ambiguity, definitely. It's such an essential comparison because, look, the technology changes, right, dramatically. But the core strategies, often surprisingly similar.
So controlling a railroad back then versus controlling an algorithm today.
Exactly. The mechanism is different, but that fundamental tension, the friction between a private ambition and the wider public good, that's constant. And we're absolutely in one of those huge transformation periods right now. Tech, globalization, some scholars are calling it a dramatic gear shift comparable to the Industrial Revolution itself.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? And the result then and now seems to be this pulling away of the super rich, which brings us to that provocative idea, plutonomy.
Right, plutonomy. It's not just a description. It started as an actual investment concept from Citigroup strategists, actually.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. The argument is basically that global economic growth is increasingly driven by and really dependent on what the super elite are consuming and investing in.
Okay, so hang on. The idea is that the demand from, say, the top 1% is so strong, it actually starts to outweigh the demand from everyone else, the other 99%.
That's precisely the logic. I mean, if the wealthy keep capturing a bigger slice of the global income pie, then it just follows that demand for the high-end luxury goods, specialized services. It's naturally going to outpace demand for, mass market, lower cost things.
And it's not just stuff, right? It affects services too.
Totally. It skews the whole service economy. So, yeah, Gucci might do better than Walmart, relatively speaking, but it also means, the demand for a top-tier lawyer, someone like David Boies, pulls way ahead of the market for, your average legal associate.
I see.
This system kind of favors concentration. It creates this feedback loop, funneling wealth towards those already at the top. And, well, that's a pattern we definitely saw emerging back in the Gilded Age.
Okay, let's use that historical context now. Let's look at those original blueprints. Andrew Carnegie feels like the place to start, the sort of enthusiastic disruptor.
Yeah, Carnegie. And his background is it's so crucial to understanding him. Born in Scotland, Dunfermline, in this cottage that's now a museum. It's described as impossibly tiny. 2 rooms.
2 rooms for the whole family.
Right. The ground floor was basically just his dad's loom. Upstairs was the one room for cooking, living, sleeping, everything. The journey from that cottage to, owning the U.S. steel industry, it tells you something about the scale of his ambition.
Incredible. And his power wasn't just technical skill initially, was it? It was more social.
Very much so. He had this amazing ability to just generate enthusiasm. Didn't matter if it was steel rails, fancy sleeping cars on trains, or iron bridges. He just got people excited. He really wasn't the stereotype of the dour Scotsman at all. He was like an engine of energy.
Yeah.
But, and this is fascinating, that enthusiasm went hand in hand with this really quite complex, almost, cynical take on the whole American success story.
How so?
Well, think about the standard narrative, right? Work hard, be diligent, frugal, sober, all that. Carnegie actually publicly kind of disparaged that relentless focus.
Oh, really? The guy who built a steel empire.
Yep. He actually promoted the opposite. He talked up the virtues of idleness, leisure, and immediate gratification. He even encouraged Americans to, find more time to play like their wiser brethren over in Europe.
That's pretty subversive coming from him.
Yeah, it is. And maybe a bit shrewd, too, right? By championing leisure, he kind of implicitly justifies the wealth of people like him, suggesting their success gave them access to this, better, less frantic way of living.
Huh? Never thought of it that way.
And later on, that ambition went global. He got really into international peace arbitration. He actually proposed a voluntary treaty to Teddy Roosevelt.
No way.
Yeah. And in this moment of just supreme self-belief, he suggested he should go meet the Kaiser instead of Roosevelt's guy. Apparently, the Kaiser claimed he'd read Carnegie's big speech.
A self-appointed diplomat funded by steel money. Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so if Carnegie is the enthusiast, John D. Rockefeller is what? Systemic intimidation?
Yeah.
Foresight?
Both, I think. Rockefeller had this very strong self-image, though. He saw himself as a Christian gentleman, genuinely believed he was unjustly maligned as a robber baron. He poured money into philanthropy, into justifying himself. He thought he was just bringing order to a messy market.
But the way he brought that order in Cleveland, it was brutal, right?
Yeah.
How did he actually force competitors to sell out to Standard Oil?
It all came down to controlling transport. Specifically, these secret deals he cut with the railroads. The infamous South Improvement Company, the SIC.
Okay.
And this wasn't just some friendly agreement. It was basically an illegal cartel. It gave Standard Oil massive rebates on shipping costs for his oil. But here's the killer part. The deal also gave him rebates on every barrel his competitors shipped.
Oh, wait, so the railroads paid him when his rivals shipped oil.
That's the genius or the ruthlessness of it. Yes.
Yeah.
It meant his competitors faced higher costs just by existing. Rival refiners were basically told, sometimes point blank, they would not ever ship any oil competitively because of Rockefeller's deals.
Wow.
So rumors of these deals spread like wildfire. Panic set in. Refiners in Cleveland just fell over each other, desperate to sell out before they were completely frozen out of the market. It was total infrastructure control, creating mass surrender.
That takes nerve, but also incredible foresight, like you said.
Oh, absolutely. One of his own executives, John Archbold, admitted it. He said Rockefeller always sees a little further than the rest of us, and then he sees around the corner. You needed incredible patience, the courage and the audacity, as Archbold put it, to impose a whole new system like that, placing chaos with, well, controlled monopoly.
And that system eventually came under attack from Ida Tarbell, the investigative journalist. How did Mr. Control handle that?
With this really strange, almost detached attitude, apparently someone read her scathing articles from McClure's magazine out loud to him on a train trip, and he just listened musingly with keen interest and no resentment.
No anger.
Seemingly not. Publicly, he never engaged. Privately, he just minimized her, dismissively calling her his lady friend or Miss Tarbarrel. He treated her like an annoying fly, not a serious challenge to his empire. Much easier to swat away psychologically.
Fascinating. Okay, so Gilded Age. Control physical infrastructure rails, oil get mega rich. Now fast forward, modern age. Control information, digital infrastructure. Same game, new tools.
Pretty much. We're in the age of disruption now, right? And it's often characterized by this relentless, sometimes almost volatile personal intensity from the founders.
Yeah, you see that with the big tech titans. They have that Gilded Age drive. But it's combined with this almost religious faith in their own tech vision. Yeah. And they expect total commitment.
Absolutely. Take Steve Jobs. His whole self-image was rooted in being this counterculture figure, even while building, one of the planet's most valuable companies.
Right. The LSD and virginity questions at Stanford.
Exactly. He'd sit there in lotus position asking these intentionally jarring questions. He genuinely seemed to think he was bringing the idealistic wind of the 60s into the boardroom.
But that idealism came with this almost frightening perfectionism. He called it passionate craftsmanship.
Oh, yeah. The story about the Macintosh circuit board is legendary for that. I mean, think about it. No customer ever sees the inside of the machine, right? Sure. But Jobs is looking at the layout of the chips, the memory components, purely based on aesthetics, demanding they look beautiful, logical. His argument was, if you don't care about the parts people can't see, how can you possibly care enough about the parts they can? It was about total internal integrity.
That's intense, and his personality was so strong it created that famous reality distortion field.
RDF, yeah. And it wasn't just talk. Bill Gates apparently experienced it directly. Gates mentioned at a dinner that Xerox had sold like 600 units of their Star computer, a competitor.
Okay, factual statement.
Right. The very next day, Jobs tells his whole team Xerox only sold 300. Gates said his own team just looked at him like, are you going to call him out on that? But nobody did. The RDF was just this projection of confidence, of vision, so powerful it made people believe impossible things were possible, even if it meant ignoring plain facts.
Imagine being an employee caught in that field. Now, contrast Jobs with Bill Gates. Gates was like the opposite of a rebel, wasn't he?
Totally different background. Prominent lawyer dad, civic leader mom, very established. While Jobs was building illegal blue boxes to make free phone calls, Gates was writing scheduling software for his high school. Not exactly an anarchist, but Gates had this incredible grasp of the future. He saw, maybe earlier than anyone, that software was going to be the key layer, the fundamental infrastructure, not just the hardware.
But his management style could be just as intense as Jobs is.
Yeah.
Just maybe less theatrical.
Oh, definitely intense. Maybe more volatile, actually. There are accounts saying basically no manager at Microsoft, especially on big projects like Windows, escaped the emotional tirades and verbal abuse of Bill Gates. He drove people hard through relentless criticism, intellectual challenges that sometimes, yeah, spilled over into real volatility.
And that kind of pressure cooker environment, you still see echoes of it today with someone like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
His expectation of commitment seems extreme.
Musk demands unrelenting intensity. There's that story from Pad 39A at SpaceX after a big setback. He shows up late, finds only 2 employees still working out of like nearly 800.
Only 2.
Yeah. And it triggers this cold rage. He demands a full report in 48 hours explaining what everyone else was supposedly doing. For him, commitment is measured in physical presence, constant effort. There's no downtime.
And look at what he's achieved. Reusable rockets,
Yeah.
EVs becoming mainstream, commercial spaceflight. But it seems like he never stops to, enjoy it.
Exactly. He just can't seem to pause and savor success. That internal drive is always pushing forward. Look at Neuralink even. Initially, the goal was like controlling a computer with your mind.
Yeah.
But apparently the focus shifted because, as one engineer put it, controlling a computer just doesn't have the same limbic resonance as making paralyzed people walk again. The goal always has to ratchet up to the biggest, most dramatic, most emotionally powerful human challenge imaginable.
Okay, shifting gears from space and software, let's talk retail. Jeff Bezos built Amazon with similar intensity, but famous for his calmness, right?
Legendary calmness. A senior VP once said, "I have never seen anyone so calm in the eye of a storm. Ice water runs through his veins." And that emotional control, that detachment, lets him make these huge, risky bets without getting swayed by, public freakouts or short-term losses.
Like the decision to price ebooks at $9.99. That was a gut call that lost money initially, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was a deliberate loss leader, modeled directly on Apple selling digital songs for 99 cents. Bezos figured customers would expect and deserve digital books to be lower priced than physical books because, well, there's no printing or shipping costs.
Oh, that makes sense.
Amazon was paying publishers maybe $15 wholesale for those books and selling them for $9.99, losing money on every single one. But Bezos didn't care. He was playing the long game, conditioning the market, betting that eventually publishers would have to lower their prices to match the digital reality.
Wow. Reshaping expectations by taking a hit up front. Okay, and finally in this disruptor category, Mark Zuckerberg. Building a social media empire based on metrics and pretty ruthless competition.
Yeah, ruthless from the very start. When he was expanding the Facebook, as it was called then, he didn't go for easy targets. He deliberately chose Columbia, Stanford, Yale because they already had their own little homegrown social networks.
Why do that? Seems harder.
He used it as a market test. His thinking was, if the Facebook could beat the established players on their home turf, it proved the concept could scale and win anywhere. It was a competitive stress test.
Smart. And what about Instagram's growth? How did that leverage existing systems?
Well, Instagram grew incredibly fast, partly because it smartly encouraged users to share their photos back onto Facebook and Twitter. So those existing networks basically became free advertising, driving new users to Instagram.
Creating referral loops.
Exactly. And then, once Facebook bought Instagram, the focus became crystal clear. Hit the big metrics. Get to 1 billion users. Why? Because that sheer volume of users generates the data. Massive amounts of data.
Which lets them target ads better.
Precisely. You can sort people into incredibly specific, granular audiences. That's the golden ticket for advertisers. More data equals more precise targeting equals more profit.
Okay, so this drive, this intensity, it flows naturally into finance, doesn't it? Where maybe the product isn't a thing or a service, but just maximizing profit itself, often right on the edge. Let's talk about the leveraged buyout, or LBO, machines like KKR and Blackstone.
Right. The LBO model is fundamentally about using debt, a lot of debt. The firm doing the buying uses the target company's own assets as collateral to secure the huge loans needed for the purchase.
So the company basically buys itself with borrowed money.
In a way, yes. And it was considered so risky back in the 80s when it first took off. People compared LBOs to those really unstable pyramidal holding companies from the 1920s that, eventually crashed and burned.
And the key to making money wasn't just improving the company, it was the speed, right? Getting your initial investment back fast.
Can we look at the Celanese example?
Oh, Celanese is a classic. Blackstone buys them and immediately cranks up the cash flow. They pushed through something like 30 price increases really quickly.
30, wow.
Yeah, which naturally made the company look much healthier on paper. So based on that improved cash flow, Celanese could then immediately borrow more money against its own assets and pay out a huge dividend straight back to Blackstone.
Hold on. So they buy the company, make it look profitable quickly, use that profitability to borrow more, and then pay themselves back almost right away, leaving mostly borrowed money at risk.
Comes the heart of financial engineering with leverage, yes. Blackstone got back something like 3/4 of their initial equity investment in just 8.5 months.
8 months. And that speed is what really juices the return rates, as they say. Look, doubling your money in 5 years, that's good, maybe 20% a year. But if you double it in 2 years, because you got most of your cash back so fast, the annual return jumps dramatically. For Celanese, it boosted that part of the return to like 50% a year. Blackstone ended up making almost $3 billion profit overall.
But how much of that profit is actually from making the company better versus just financial maneuvering and maybe luck with interest rates?
That's the big debate, isn't it? One prominent buyout exec famously argued that maybe 75% of all the value created in private equity over the last quarter century was just down to two things: falling interest rates, making debt cheaper, and using more leverage.
75%. That's huge.
It is. Academic studies are usually a bit more conservative, maybe suggesting leverage accounts for about a third of the gains. But nobody denies that piling on debt is absolutely central to getting those huge exponential returns.
Okay, so that's aggressive, maybe ethically questionable, but often legal engineering. What about when it crosses the line? SC Capital and Stephen Cohen seem like the poster children for that.
Yeah, SEC Capital eventually had to plead guilty. They admitted the firm was essentially built on a culture of insider trading for more than a decade. Cohen himself got banned from managing other people's money for a while, paid this enormous fine, $1.8 billion.
$1.8 billion? That must have hurt.
Well, yes and no. The amount was staggering, but his personal fortune was already so immense that the commentary at the time was he was barely going to notice that the money was gone. It almost became just a cost of doing business.
Which is disturbing in itself. What kind of specific things are happening there? How did the insider trading work?
Well, within the firm, people kind of knew what was going on, or at least suspected. There was a lot of talk about certain trades. One famous example that got reported was how SAC suddenly flipped from being massively long to massively short on a pharma stock called Elon, right after Cohen had reportedly gotten a call.
Being code for.
For getting inside information, yeah. Material non-public info. And look, this wasn't happening in a vacuum. This was during that whole deal crazy era where information, maybe questionable information, was flying around. It was a murky, gray area, legally speaking. The crackdown really started with arrests like Dennis Levine's, which eventually led to the whole Michael Milken junk bond empire unraveling.
Right. So beyond getting illegal tips, there's high-frequency trading, HFT. That's legal, but it feels like gaming the system using pure speed.
HFT firms are like technological card counters at a casino. They use algorithms to find tiny, fleeting advantages in the market structure, and they only make trades when they have a statistical edge that practically guarantees they won't lose.
Guarantees. Really?
Well, close to it. Some HFT firms apparently traded for 5 years without a single losing day.
5 years. Not one loss. How is that even possible?
They exploit tiny price discrepancies between different exchanges that exist for milliseconds. Imagine a stock is stable, say. Someone wants to buy at $80.50. Someone else wants to sell at $80.52. The HFT firm sees a big buy order sitting on one exchange, say IEX, at $80.51, the midpoint.
Okay.
Their algorithm instantly buys shares at $80.51 on IEX and simultaneously sells those same shares on a different exchange for $80.52. They capture that tiny 1 or 2 cent spread over and over millions of times a day. They act like a tiny self-serving bridge between buyer and seller, using speed to skim profit.
Invisible to regular investors, but incredibly profitable for them. Which brings us to the latest financial explosion, crypto. And Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, and FTX.
SBF is interesting because he came from that sophisticated HFT world, Jane Street, very quantitative, but he left because he saw crypto as this Wild West, totally primitive market. Like, high-frequency trading hadn't even really arrived there yet. He literally said he wanted to go fuck around and try some of these things where there were basically no rules.
Fuck around. With billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And the FTX Alameda collapse, what was the core mechanism there? It involved their own token, FTT, right?
Yeah, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Essentially, there was no real separation between the exchange, FTX, and SBF's trading firm, Alameda Research. Alameda got special treatment. It was basically exempt from normal collateral rules.
Meaning they could borrow customer money.
Effectively, yes. They borrowed billions from FTX, and the collateral they posted for these loans was largely FTT, the token created by FTX itself. Its value is entirely dependent on FTX looking healthy.
So it's like borrowing money using your own monopoly money as collateral.
Pretty much. When the crypto market tanked, FTT's price collapsed, the collateral became worthless, and suddenly FTX couldn't give customers their money back. They owed something like $8.6 billion, just a total meltdown fueled by opaque circular borrowing.
Which just underscores the ultimate danger, doesn't it? When this drive for wealth completely detaches from ethics, from reality even, you end up with outright fraud, often hidden behind a charismatic leader with a grand vision.
Exactly. We've seen this rise of the cult of the personal visionary CEO. People get so caught up in the story, the charisma, that huge red flags get ignored. Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes are probably the most chilling example.
The blood testing company.
Right. And the core premise was just fraudulent. Their machines didn't work reliably. They repeatedly failed basic proficiency tests for crucial things like TSH, the thyroid hormone. These weren't minor glitches. The tech was fundamentally flawed.
And the human cost. There were specific stories, weren't there?
Horrifying ones. There's an anecdote about Holmes and her partner, Sunny Balwani, personally convincing the father of a Stanford student, a guy who was really scared about potential cancer, to let Theranos test his blood for cancer markers using their bogus technology.
Oh my God.
It just shows this willingness to exploit real human fear and vulnerability to keep the illusion going, selling the fiction over the reality, even when lives are potentially on the line.
Compared to that outright fraud, you have something like WeWork and Adam Neumann. Not illegal in the same way, perhaps, but just incredibly self-serving, right? Defining corporate governance.
Oh, absolutely. Neumann became notorious for blurring the lines. Like, he personally owned buildings and then leased them back to WeWork at high rates. So he's profiting as CEO and as landlord using investor money.
Double dipping.
Yeah. And then there were things like complex legal reorganizations that resulted in him getting huge personal tax savings on stock awards. It just looked bad.
And there was always that question, is WeWork a tech company or just a fancy real estate company?
Fundamentally, it was always a real estate company. They leased office space, spruced it up, and subleased it. That's the core business. But Neumann brilliantly dressed it up, marketed it as a community, a tech play. That narrative is what justified the insane valuations, even as the company was burning through cash. He personally benefited from the real estate side while selling the tech dream to investors.
So beyond individual company meltdowns, wealth gets used to shape the whole political system, right? To make sure the rules favor accumulation. The Koch brothers are the prime example here.
Textbook case. For the Kochs, their political ideology and their business interests just dovetailed so seamlessly. Lower taxes, good for them. Weaker environmental regulations, looser rules on emissions, directly boosts the bottom line of their fossil fuel empire. They built arguably the most effective political influence machine in the country, systematically pushing for deregulation.
And they didn't do it transparently, did they?
No, not at all. They used a whole network of front groups like the Economic Education Trust. These were specifically set up to hide where the money was coming from, often skirting or outright violating campaign finance laws to funnel vast sums into politics.
Why does that hidden influence work so well?
Because Washington is incredibly sensitive to perceived public opinion, even if it's manufactured. Grover Norquist had that great quote calling K Street lobbyists a $3 billion weather vane. He said, just the appearance of strong public opposition, even if it's just engineered raucous rallies, is enough to scare off corporate donors and make politicians back down from policies that influence groups don't like.
Creates a chilling effect. And finally, none of this global movement of money, legitimate or not, works without financial secrecy, does it?
Secrecy is the lubricant for a lot of this. Global havens, especially places like Hong Kong and Singapore and Asia, are crucial. They often show, let's say, little interest in separating legitimate business capital from, well, ill-gotten gains. After the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s, estimates suggested something like US $200 billion just from Indonesia was parked in Singaporean banks.
And Singapore actively courted that kind of money, didn't they?
They made a very deliberate strategic choice. They changed their laws, increased bank account secrecy, altered their trust laws specifically to attract the kind of wealth that was feeling the heat in traditional havens like Switzerland as international bodies cracked down on tax evasion.
They saw a market niche and filled it.
Exactly. It created a situation where even prominent economists felt they had to speak out. Andy Shih, who used to be at Morgan Stanley, very bluntly called Singapore the money laundering center for corrupt Indonesian businessmen and government officials. Strong words, but it reflected the reality they had cultivated.
Okay, so after digging through all these stories, from Carnegie to crypto, there really is this consistent pattern, isn't there? It doesn't matter if you're controlling railroads or algorithms, using LBOs or offshore accounts.
The engine driving that kind of exponential wealth seems to always involve disruption, yes, but also pushing boundaries, seeking opacity, operating right up to and sometimes well past the ethical or legal line.
It feels like the common thread, doesn't it? Connecting Carnegie's strong-arm tactics with SBF's weird collateral schemes or Rockefeller's secrecy with Singapore deliberately building a haven for hidden money. The rules of the game, the market structure itself, keeps getting bent for massive personal gain.
It does, and it feeds right back into what economists like Thomas Piketty have shown about capitalism's underlying structure.
Piketty's big analysis of wealth and inequality.
Yeah, his really sobering finding, looking at centuries of data, is that there's basically no natural, spontaneous process within capitalism that stops these destabilizing, inegalitarian forces from prevailing permanently. History shows that high wealth concentration, the top 10% owning 50, 60% or more of everything that's actually the historical norm, not some temporary blip.
So the kind of rapid, sometimes ruthless wealth building we've been talking about just reinforces that long-term pattern of inequality and potentially dynastic wealth.
That's what the data suggests, yeah. It accelerates it.
Okay, so we've looked at the disruptive genius side, the side that gives us undeniable benefits like cheap steel back then, or global connection and EVs today. But we've also seen the ruthless methods, the ethical shortcuts, the huge disparities these individuals and systems create.
Which really leaves us, and leaves you listening, with that final provocative question to wrestle with, doesn't it? When the societal benefits are huge, cheap oil, instant communication, maybe life-saving tech someday, do those positive outcomes somehow justify the often brutal methods, the ethical compromises, and the vast concentration of wealth and power that comes with it? Does the good generated by disruption inherently excuse the way it's achieved, and who benefits most?
That's the fundamental ethical calculus we're all navigating, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
something to think about.